I'd now like to ask Andrew MacLeod to come and join us. Andrew is the CEO of the Committee of Melbourne, and he's going to address the topic of where should housing issues be in 20 years' time and what are we doing now to influence it. So, welcome, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm not going to give a PowerPoint. I don't believe in death by PowerPoint, so it's a relief for some. Allow me to start off by giving just a 2-second introduction to what is the Committee for Melbourne. Many of you here know us quite well, but some of you don't. Committee for Melbourne was founded 26 years ago by a number of big business leaders, and we still represent most of the big organisations and businesses of Melbourne, coming together to look at not their day-to-day business interests, but the long-term strategic future for Melbourne, greater urban Melbourne as an organism, and how do we affect the city to ensure that our livability increases as we move forward in time. I'd like to start off with a couple of stories to set the scene. In the late 1930s, my grandmother moved down from Tatura in rural Victoria to one of those McMansions on the outer growth areas of Melbourne. She moved into one of A.V. Jennings' first housing lots for the growth areas as they then were, even though not called a growth area or authority. And I'm sure the Save Our Suburbs and planning backlash people of the time said that it was horrible, unsustainable, and certainly nothing for the future. When Grandma moved out of Walpole Street Queue, as she got old, she had to move suburbs into an aged care facility away from her community. Two themes I'll come back to. In the early 1970s, my parents divorced, so as a freshly minted bachelor, my father nicked off to Paris to have a bit of a look around, as you do when you're going through a midlife crisis, and came back to his voluntary role on the South Melbourne City Council with his bright idea to put cafes, or tables and chairs, on the footpaths outside cafes and have al fresco dining. He was being fought on that idea by other people on the council who put the two proposals to him, or the two counter views to him, that of course al fresco dining wouldn't work in Melbourne if it worked in even if it worked in Paris, because, well, Melbourne is colder than Sydney, and where would women push their prams if the footpaths were so full of tables and chairs? Dad finally won the argument by pointing out that it snowed in Paris, and although he assures me as a freshly minted bachelor he didn't do any experiments on this, that Parisian women, given the right circumstances, could also get pregnant. Funnily enough, we have al fresco dining in Melbourne, and our cafe culture and our tables on our footpaths are a critical element of our changing nature. So I suppose the point that I'm wanting to make with those two stories is that you can't plan for the status quo. And we've always got to look at what our role is in not building today's city, because today's city doesn't really matter. It's our role in building tomorrow's city, and are we building the right things? So what does tomorrow's city look like? Well, we do agree with some of the data that was up on the screen before, that Melbourne's population growth will slow, but not much. We believe will slow from the 1.65% average over the last 50 years to around about a 1.4% average over the next 50 years. Save Our Suburbs like it when I use words like slow. They hate it when I use phrases like that will still give us a population of 8 million in the year 2060. And that's what 1.4% means. And where should this 8 million go? Well, we believe most of it should go within the urban growth boundary that we currently have. Is it realistic to put 8 million people largely within the urban growth boundary as we currently have it? Well, let me give you some comparative statistics. If we had the population density of London, Melbourne would have 12 million people within the urban growth boundary. And last time I looked, London was a pretty good city. If we had the population density of New York, we'd have 25 million people. And if we had the population density of Mumbai, and gosh, I hope we never get there, we would have 87 million people within the urban growth boundary of Melbourne. It puts this ridiculous argument we have at the national level of Australia being full at 39 million into perspective, when most Mumbaians can tell you we can fit double that within Melbourne alone. Now, challenge. Is it realistic to achieve 8 million people in Melbourne by the year 2060. That is achieving 2/3 of London's density over the next 50 years, and I think not only is it achievable, but it's essential. Because if you asked most Melburnians, is Melbourne's density increasing or decreasing, most people would say it's increasing. They'd take one look at Docklands and say it's increasing. The truth is we had 23 people per hectare in Melbourne in 1960 and 14 people per hectare at the beginning of the 2000s. We have nearly halved our urban density in 50 years. And here's a phrase I want to jam into everyone's mind. Decreasing density is dangerous. It's socially, economically and environmentally unsustainable. And we've got to ask ourselves the role. When you design your product, are you designing your product up until the retail point? I've designed a house and I'm finished? Or are you designing a city? Are you designing a future city for the generations that follow us? Are you designing an urban growth area that will be like Grandma's Walpole Street queue? And if you're going to do that, there are two very interesting lessons to take from Grandma and Walpole Street queue. One is that Walpole Street queue became a very nice place to live. The other is she had to move when she went into aged care. And this is where I think, and this will be music to some of your ears, I think, the Save Our Suburbs and the planning backlash people are the greatest threats to the future livability of Australian suburbs. We are shooting ourselves in the foot in the way we're currently having our public debate. Because if we want people to age in place, if we want people to be young in place, if we want people to live their entire life cycles within their communities, we need to be building in greyfields, brownfields and greenfields development, mixed density options and mixed demographic options. We need to be able to allow people to have their first home, their family home and their aged care facility in place within the communities that they want, which means in the new areas we build, be they as part of the Growth Areas Authority or the new Urban Renewal Authority, we must build mixed demographic suburbs. I live in Docklands. I'm one of these single people households, no family and no intention of doing so, much to my father's shock. I should send him back to Paris. But are we giving everyone enough options in all of their suburbs? Are we actually thinking of the entire life cycle? Are we concentrated just on a retail product or a community that we're building? Now, many of you I've spoken to one-on-one say we would prefer to build communities than build buildings. Question, do we have enough of the right type of regulation? Now, coming from the business community, our instinct is to always say deregulate, deregulate, deregulate. But if we don't have the right sort of regulations, will the market make us build buildings? Or will the market give us the freedom to build communities, including the infrastructure, which is a little bit more expensive? So can we actually create the pricing points if we don't have to build communities, to choose to build communities, then flog that better product off to the market? Is that achievable? I'm not sure. Do we actually, if we look at ourselves as building communities in the future city, want a decent size and a decent type of community for us to build? And do we have the right regulations to ensure we have a level playing field between the different producers of product to make sure that we build our future communities? I'm going to finish off by saying one last thing. Social cohesion is critical for the future cities. If we continue to build single demographic suburbs, like my homeland in Docklands, we are by definition putting rich people there and poor people there, and they're called the slums. And they're the things that we don't have in Australia and we take for granted that we don't. But it's not luck that gets us there. We need to ensure that the mixed demographic suburbs also have the right social infrastructure, including the ongoing recurrent expenditure for those social infrastructures, to make sure that each of our suburban areas are harmonious. So we build future cities that have livability in every aspect of each of our communities so people can live the full life cycle. So I'd ask you to think, what is your role in greater urban Melbourne, not just the areas you're growing? What is your role in the life cycle of a product, not just the end to the retail point? And if you guys are really interested in having discussions about the long-term livability of Melbourne and want to get involved in big policy discussions, come and join Committee for Melbourne, because we like playing with everyone. It's a lot of fun. Thank you very much.